Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy. My name's Tom, and this unit we will talk just a little bit about arguments and what an argument is and what kind of arguments we can expect to see in the course moving forward. This is just kind of a very quick primer on logic, and it should help in reading some of our articles and in getting to kind of the heart of what the philosopher is trying to do. Um, so, obviously, there are different senses in which we use the term argument. One of them is, just kind of a heated discussion between two individuals, a disagreement of some sort. In philosophy, though, an argument has to do with providing persuasive support for a position, right? And when it comes to argumentation, there's more technical ideas and definitions of what kinds of arguments we're using, right? And I want to outline two today, deductive and inductive arguments. Well, first, let me say something more about the technical definition of an argument. In logic, an argument is a series of statements in which one of them is the conclusion, and the others are the premises, and the conclusion follows from the premises, right? So, first thing to make note of here is that it's a series of statements. Statements are truth evaluable linguistic items. So, contrast this with things like questions and demands and imperatives, right? A question is not true or false, it's asking something. An imperative like shut the door, close the window, get over here, these kinds of things are not truth valuable either, right? They're asking for their instructions. So those don't really factor into arguments, although they are sometimes used as rhetorical devices, right? Rhetorical questions and, exclamations that people put in arguments. But in philosophy, you want to use truth valuable statements. And there's good reason for this, which we'll get into in just a second. So you have a series of, statements, you have a series of premises, and then you have a conclusion that follows. So let me give an example. So all fish have gills. Nemo is a fish, therefore Nemo has gills, right? This is an argument. It has two premises. It has a conclusion that follows. Another more kind of like classical Aristotelian example of this is all humans are mammals, all mammals are mortal, therefore all humans are mortal. That's actually called like an Aristotelian hypothetical syllogism, right? But we don't need to really be concerned about that. But these are arguments where we have a couple of statements and we are able to make an inference to another statement, right? The examples I also gave are also considered deductive arguments, right? Deductive arguments are the kinds of arguments in which the conclusion follows of a kind of logical necessity, right? They usually have to do with conceptual distinctions, and they're very kind of tight in terms of how the conclusion follows from the premises, right? And when it comes to deductive arguments, there are two modes of evaluation. The first is validity, right? A valid deductive argument is one that has a valid or good form to it, right? So, for example, all fish have gills. Nemo is a fish, therefore Nemo has gills. That is a valid form of argument, right? Uh, However, you can use that same form and say things that are untrue and still have a situation in which, if the premises were true, then the conclusion must follow. So, for example, if I said no fish have gills, Nemo is a fish, then I'd have to say Nemo does not have gills, right? And that would be a valid form of inference. However, that argument would not be sound. The second form of evaluation here is soundness, and these are separate issues, right? Whether or not your argument has good form to it, or whether or not the premises that you have in your argument are in fact true, right? So a valid argument is one in which if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Um, a sound argument is a valid argument in which the premises are in fact true, right? This is an important distinction to be aware of when we're reading philosophy. By and large, philosophers will use deductive arguments. If you are a philosopher and you want to make the most compelling case possible, then you're going to want to use the strongest kind of argument, and really deductive arguments provide the most conclusive evidence for your conclusion. Now, anyone who is a philosopher, especially anyone that we're going to read in this class, knows to make a valid form of inference, right? So they're not usually going to get tripped up on that. So soundness is going to be the kind of main line of attack. They're going to make a good inference. They're going to have strong, compelling premises. And the key will really be to kind of try to undercut those premises and say, in some way, they're not in fact true. So that's just like a good strategy moving forward in reading the different thinkers we will read. The second kind of argument is inductive arguments. Inductive arguments are ones that are based on experience, observation, statistics, various kinds of evidence, and then make a kind of generalization based on those. So, for example, I've seen 5 blue jays in my backyard today. There must be a nest nearby, right? That might be true. I have some good evidence for that, but it's not necessarily going to follow, right? There are other reasons why there were blue jays in my backyard, right? And why I saw so many. Maybe there's a lot of food around or something like this. Another example here is, 80% of students in my classes have part-time jobs. Therefore, ACC students work a lot or something like this, right? You're making kind of a generalization based on a finite amount of evidence, right? Now, we use inductive reasoning all the time, and it serves us well a lot. However, in philosophy, inductive reasoning is somewhat controversial. And we'll talk about a particular thinker who really kind of exploits this a little bit, which is David Hume. But consider the following argument. The sun has risen every day that I have been alive. Therefore, the sun will rise tomorrow, right? It's really, really likely that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. And I'm pretty much counting on it. However, I don't know for sure, right? And just because things have happened in a certain way for a long, long time, it doesn't mean that they will continue to be that way in the future, right? I can't really be sure of that kind of projection. And so inductive reasoning actually becomes quite controversial. And there's all kinds of problems of induction. This is a topic in philosophy of science. And, you know, it's difficult to see how observation is really supposed to factor into our knowledge of the world, our general knowledge of the world. Whereas, if you kind of start with conceptual distinctions, then you can kind of make pretty solid inferences or things that are a little bit more difficult to undercut. So for that reason, most philosophers will focus on deductive arguments. And even, arguments that cut against induction, ironically, are deductive arguments. So um, That's it for this week. There's also the unit on fallacies. Just watch the video. You should just be aware of the kinds of fallacies out there to contrast with, the kind of reasoning that we've been talking about today, and the ideas of good inferences. But the book is pretty clear about all this stuff, and it's just a little bit of a primer to kind of get us aware of some things as we move forward. So, nice talking with you. See you soon.